All right, folks, I think we can get going. It's 9 o'clock. And Celeste, do we have board member Pavley and Nagami on? They're both on. Perfect. Okay, well, should we kick it off?
We should kick it off.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September 30th, 2022 Wildlife Conservation Board meeting. This meeting is a follow-up from a meeting that we had back in August, on August 25th, in which two projects were deferred. The board had asked that we bring those back for consideration by the end of September, so we are here today for those. I do like to welcome everybody. This meeting will be in person as well as virtually. So I think, folks have gotten the links and are participating both by the computer online as well as up here in front. So with that, we'll do a roll call and get started. So from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Director Bonham.
I am here.
From the Department of Finance, Sally Lukenbill.
Here.
Samantha Murray. Samantha will not be here today. Alina Boakday, member from the County of LA, will not be here today. Board member Nagami.
Here.
And board member Pavley.
Here.
And board member Phillips.
Here.
Great. Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Great. Hey, just quickly, those in the audience, which is sparser than usual, which might be the narrow focus of the agenda and the Friday morning. And those online, it is a focused agenda. We have two projects we're going to pick up that we discussed in our last meeting. Those are action items. And then we're going to have a discussion amongst the board members and kind of directional guidance, potentially decisions on a way in which we want to head on a policy issue. So I have an eye towards 11 o'clock because of a prior commitment. We'll take as much time as we need, but I don't think we need several hours for this.
Great. And then before we do, I do want to welcome our legislative advisory members as well. Keith Gelino down on the end is representing Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Kahn. And then also, I believe on the phone, we have Caitlin Peterson representing Andreas Borges, as well as Natalie Turan representing Assembly Member Rivas. So with that, we'll get into the agenda unless any of the board members have any opening comments or anything they'd like to say. All right, that'll take us to agenda item number 2, the Ackerson Meadow project. And as like our regularly meetings, staff will give a quick presentation of the project. We will open it up for board member questions, public comments, and then hopefully go to a vote. So with that, Judah Grossman on our staff will present you the project. Judah.
Don and members of the board, I know we're on a tight timeline, so I'm going to speed through this, especially since I presented this in August already. So Ackerson Meadow, the map shown here, it falls within both Yosemite National Park and Stanislaus National Forest. Next slide. Ackerson is one of the largest low elevation meadows in the Sierra Nevada. It has a history of grazing and hay production, and some associated activities have led to degradation of that meadow, including ditching and irrigation and road building. Next slide. These two illustrations just help us remember what we might expect to see in an unhealthy versus a healthy meadow. And so briefly, in an unhealthy meadow, we would see a channelized, simplified stream channel, lower groundwater table, and intrusion, or excuse me, encroachment by upland vegetation replacing wet meadow habitat. Next slide. And in a healthy wet meadow, we would expect to see a high groundwater table, a meandering and braided channel, and healthy wet meadow habitat as illustrated here. These are great illustrations. I recommend folks go back and look at these in more detail if you have time. Next slide. Ackerson Meadow. So here we have an example of a cut bank in Ackerson Meadow and the intrusion of conifers. So what would be an upland plant into the wet meadow habitat. Next slide. And these are additional photos showing eroded stream bank in Ackerson Meadow. And the design drawing is an excerpt showing the grade control structure that would be part of the restoration action to improve meadow function. Next slide. There is some healthy remnant habitat on Ackerson Meadow that can serve as a reference site for our target condition. Next slide. And there is a robust monitoring program associated with this project, including geomorphology, vegetation, hydrology, and so on. Next slide. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our grantee representative, Matt Freitas, and other folks we have in the audience today. If there are follow-up questions, include Athena Demetri, Supervisory Natural Resource Manager at Yosemite National Park, Tim Kuhn, Biologist at Yosemite National Park, and on the phone we have Dave Campbell, Invasive Plant Program Manager with Yosemite National Park. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Matt Freitas. I'm the Associate Director of Headwaters Conservation for American Rivers. I serve as the project manager for American Rivers for the Ackerson Meadow Restoration Project. And as Judah mentioned, I'm joined today both in person and on the phone by staff from the park and the Stanislaus National Forest, who are the two land managers on the project. Thank you. You advanced the slide already. You beat me to it. A bit of backstory about Ackerson Meadow is worth noting here. As Judah alluded to, the majority of Ackerson Meadow was privately held from 1857 to 2016. That's 160 years of private land use that included homesteading, extensive grazing, ditch construction, and road building. The unfortunate legacy of these uses is a highly degraded meadow system that is drained by a massive gully. The gully is 3 miles long, it's on average 15 feet deep, and it's up to 100 feet wide. An estimated 150,000 cubic yards of soil have been lost from Ackerson. That's 15,000 dump trucks. And the degradation has meant the loss of 110 acres of historic wetlands and the continued threat to the remaining 85. Despite that incredible degradation, Ackerson retains some of the highest biodiversity in the Sierra Nevada. It's home to nearly 60 bird species, including dense populations of the California endangered great gray owl, North America's largest owl, and is the only place in Yosemite where you can find California endangered willow flycatcher. These species and the lack of high quality meadow in this region are the key reasons, or are key reasons, why we've prioritized the restoration of Ackerson. As Judah described, the project is designed to provide rapid recovery for this system in a short period of time. We've considered multiple design alternatives, and the team selected what's called a full gully fill or stage 0 restoration because it provides provides major improvements for wildlife, plant species, historic and tribal resources, and hydrology in an estimated 2 to 5 years. And this system and this landscape need rapid recovery. The cumulative effects of climate change, catastrophic wildfire, and loss of biodiversity are acute here, and the project is designed to provide resiliency, mitigation, and real change against those impacts in short order. And it's an ambitious project. I'll be the first to tell you. By at least one measure, it will be the largest meadow restoration attempted in the Sierra Nevada. We estimate that the project is going to restore 103 acres of historic wetlands that have been lost, and protect the 85 that are remaining. We'll improve 230 acres of habitat for songbirds, great gray owl, flycatcher, western pond turtle, and a number of terrestrial mammal species. And then we'll increase groundwater storage and base loads to the South Fork Tuolumne River. It supports the goals and objectives of the State Water Action Plan, State Wildlife Action Plan, and the state's 30 by 30 initiatives. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the long history of land use and degradation at Ackerson also means we have to contend with multiple invasive plant species that are remnants from that use, some of which present a high risk to the function and health of the meadow and the goals of our restoration project. To that end, the Yosemite National Park controls invasive plant species as directed by their 2006 National Park System Management Policies and the 1999 Executive Order 13112. Similarly, the U.S. Forest Service has goals and objectives from their 2011 Forest Service Manual and the 1991 Stanislaus National Forest Plan to manage invasive and noxious plant species. I'd like to be very clear about two things. First, we're not proposing to use any WCB funds to control invasive plant species at Ackerson, not for purchase of materials or supplies or any labor. All of those costs are borne by cost share, mostly federal dollars. Second, both Yosemite National Park and the Forest Service pursue their invasive plant control work independent of restoration projects. So while we've coordinated our restoration project with those efforts and those teams, the control work would be conducted whether or not there was a project there, because they have federal directives to pursue that work. At Ackerson, all of the invasive plant control is being handled by the park. They're working on both park and Forest Service land as part of an MOU. And it's done in accordance with their invasive plant management plan and the NEPA document. It was an EA for that plan. And the plan contains a full range of control methods: mechanical, manual, cultural, chemical treatments, and the park's team carefully considers treatments for each location and each species based on the scientific literature and the proven efficacy of those treatments in those contexts. The NEPA document for that plan was prepared and reviewed by an interdisciplinary team of scientists, and it concluded that there was no significant adverse effects from the plan. Furthermore, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was consulted on this plan via Section 7 consultation, and they concluded that it was not likely to adversely affect any federally listed species that are known in the site, or within the park, nor jeopardize any proposed endangered species or any critical habitat. The NEPA document includes multiple mitigation measures, pages of them, to mitigate any negative impacts of invasive control on wildlife, wetlands, water quality, native plants, and cultural resources. One of those measures is that the park invasive program staff prepare an annual work plan and then reviews that with park biologists, botanists, archaeologists, and other subject matter experts to make sure that there's no negative impacts from their work. In addition to the NEPA document for the invasive plant management plan, it bears noting that the NEPA document for our restoration project also analyzed for impacts of invasive control at Ackerson, specifically at Ackerson, including the use of herbicides. And again, the NEPA analysis concluded that there would not be any significant effect from these activities. And again, the service was consulted and concurred that the actions were not likely to have any adverse effect. Next slide, please. The invasive control work at Ackerson is focused on 8 invasive species, including 2 high priority species that are worth mentioning: Medusa head grass and velvet grass. Now we've laid out the park's integrated pest management approach for these species in table 1 of our revised herbicide use questionnaire. And so I would direct you to look at those, including all the alternative methods that they considered for each species. And I'm not going to go into the details of that table because I think it's better presented in writing, but I'll note that where feasible, the plan prioritizes manual and mechanical methods, including mowing, weed whacking, hand pulling. And where those methods are inadequate to meet the conservation goals, the park then uses targeted herbicide treatments, spot treatments with specific types of applicators, with a select few herbicides that are approved by the NEPA document and then were reviewed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Yosemite National Park is only permitted to use 6 herbicides within the park, and only 3 are currently being used at Ackerson. 2 of those, rimsulfuron and imidacloprid, are selective herbicides that only affect certain types of plants. The third is the aquatic formulation of glyphosate, which is only being used for a single species, velvet grass. Now, the park uses an aquatic formulation of glyphosate, which is approved for use in aquatic habitats, in both upland and aquatic contexts to limit any negative impacts. And it should be noted that the 2 selective herbicides that we have, the rimsulfuron and the imidacloprid, have been generally prioritized over the use of glyphosate wherever feasible without sacrificing the efficacy of treatment. And again, I'd refer you to table 1 because we do try to lay that out in quite a bit of detail. The park considered multiple control methods for invasive species Ackerson and has sought to limit the use of herbicides to the extent possible. Unfortunately, non-chemical methods alone are insufficient to meet the invasive species control goals at Ackerson. Due to the biology of the species involved, the extent of their populations within the meadow, the context of the site is rather remote, and the respective goals of invasive control and the restoration project, it's just not possible to use non-chemical methods exclusively. Next slide. The overarching goal of our project is to reestablish the geomorphic landforms, the hydrologic processes, and the vegetation community that once formed and then maintained wetlands at this site for millennia. We are trying to reestablish and protect 200 acres of historic wetlands here to support the diverse species that currently use the habitat and the ecosystems services that this system historically provided in this watershed. The project has been designed to do so in short order. in order to meet the need for high quality meadow habitat in this landscape in the face of rapidly changing conditions. And if we are successful, the wet meadow plant community and the wet meadow conditions and then the native plant communities that we are establishing will be able to persist without our intervention or invasive plant control in the long term. But if invasive species control efforts in the short term are ineffective here, Ackerson may host a complete monoculture of velvet grass and Medusa head grass at the expense of the native species and meadow function that we're trying really hard to establish and support, and that the wildlife species really need. The risk of ineffective control is essentially a failed restoration project on a grand scale in this case. And I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak to you today. We appreciate WCB's commitment to the preservation, protection, and restoration of California's habitat. And we hope that we have the opportunity to work together with you guys at Ackerson to restore this singularly amazing meadow. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Matt. So just for confirmation, what we'll do is see whether board members have questions for you. Board members, feel free to, express opinion, comments. It's hard, Fran and Damon, for us to see any hand raised function here. So John and I will just make sure to, after it looks like we've exhausted here at the panel, we'll go to y'all online, and then we'll have public comment if anyone wants to make public comment. And then we'll see if we have a motion to approve or otherwise, manage the project. So Matt, one quick question for me, and then I do have a first comment. How big is the gully? You give us statistics as to length, depth, and width.
Yeah, it's pretty massive. 3 miles long on average when you include all the sinuosity of it. It's a 2 mile long valley, so an extra mile of sinuosity there. Average is 15 feet deep, and the widest point is 100 feet wide. The estimated soil volume is 150,000 cubic yards.
Okay, so the project's trying to fix something which is a humongous scar on the natural functioning of that Sierra Meadow, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And second question, no WCB money goes towards herbicide application, correct?
Zero. No supplies, labor, or materials.
Okay, so here's my feedback for you. And I remember an article I read in the Washington Post, it's probably a decade ago. They interviewed a biologist for a tribe on the Olympic Peninsula working on Elwha Dam removal. And this was a fisheries biologist, if my memory's right. I think his name was Mike McHenry, but I could have that wrong. And he said, when I got into this business, and I'm paraphrasing, I had no idea I'd be working with bulldozers. But I've realized to bring back nature, we have to go big. And that's your restoration project. You are trying to repair something which is a stunning impact.
Yeah, very much so.
I appreciate that. I support the project.
Thank you.
So any questions or other comments from board members?
Yes. I'll ask 1 or 2 questions here if this is the appropriate time, or I can wait, whatever Director Donnelly or Chair Bottom wishes.
Okay. Senator, how about we run through the dais
Yes.
and then we'll come to you and Damon. for
Perfect.
questions.
Yes,
Great.
thank you. Mhm.
Catherine?
I feel like God is talking to me when Fran talks to me. I can't see you, but I can hear your voice. Thank you, Matt. That was a nice presentation. It sounds like a good project. My concern is glyphosate. I'm not focused on the other herbicides in this case. And this may be a question for your colleagues from the parks, but I'm interested in knowing when the parks did its IPMP, because I looked online and it looked like it was 2010, but I may not be looking at the right place.
You are correct.
Okay. So that would have been well before the more recent information, science has come out about glyphosate. I think it's, if you look through the literature, and I put in a bunch of information into the board packet, that it has a longer lifespan. It has a bigger effect on wildlife, fish, especially fish, amphibians, than previously believed. Although a 1997 fact sheet put out that 1997 dated fact sheet that is used as a standard by the USDA shows that they anticipate that the lifespan can extend to 249 days. There are other science now saying that the lifespan, meaning the persistence of the chemical in the water, soil, et cetera, can be longer than a year. So I'm wondering if the Park Service, I know there is glyphosate planned to be used. Is there an alternative herbicide, an aquatic herbicide that is not glyphosate, that we don't have solid information as we do have with glyphosate, that will be have a negative impact on the environment?
I can speak to that, and if I can't answer the question fully for you, we can, David Campbell, who's on the phone, he's their Invasive Plant Program Manager. So I'll just first respond to kind of the timing of the EA and the IPMP. So the environmental assessment and the IPMP were basically set up two things. One is the toolbox that's available to the park. You know, what are the methods that they're approved to use? And then it sets up a framework, an adaptive management framework that allows them to, you know, respond dynamically to the changing conditions and the new species and the new science that comes out. So the EA is a little bit different, I think, than maybe what some have in mind when you look at it. It sets out a framework for how the park responds in the long term. That's why it's still relevant. And then the second piece I'd add is that all of the IPM work goes through an annual work plan process where the invasive species program manager develops a work plan for each location, each species, and lays out the treatment methods that's provided. And then they review that with the biologists and the various subject matter experts. So that's another place where the new science gets incorporated. The park, you know, referencing the toolbox, what's available to them there for velvet grass, the two herbicides, and unfortunately for velvet grass, you do need to use an herbicide because it's a perennial grass that spreads rhizomatously. So it sprouts from its roots and it spreads.
And that's different from Johnson grass, right?
I'm not as familiar with Johnson grass. I do know that Johnson grass is rhizomatous, but I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah.
On the,
Okay, there, but it's a different plant we're talking about.
it is a different.
yes.
It is a different species. Yes. So there are two herbicides in the park's toolbox that would be effective on this species. Imazapyr and the aquatic formulation of glyphosate. Imazapyr has a very long residency time, and it has pre-emergent properties as well. So it would effectively kill any native plants that we were trying to establish, right? That's the goal, is that these native plants then can establish and then competitively exclude the invasives. So Imazapyr would not work in this case. It sticks around far too long and it would kill all the other plants. The park has a limited toolbox of what's available to them. If I can't really speak to, you know, how much the new science has been incorporated.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at, is I want to know if since 2010, if there's been, and it's probably best to hear from the park people, how do you update it? What update has happened? And why are you continuing to use glyphosate if you are updating it? You can go up to the.
So if I could just interject for a minute, Board Member Phillips. I think it's relevant to hear from the Park Service, but I would encourage us to remind ourselves there is no proposal to this board to use WCB funds for application of herbicide for the project. The question to this board will be whether we vote to approve or not approve the funding we're being asked to set aside for the project.
And
So I think it's relevant to
yeah.
hear from the Park Service, but I would ask we keep it in the context of the task at the board.
And to that point, my next question to council might help illuminate why I'm concerned about the use of glyphosate, despite the fact that we're not paying for the glyphosate.
I'll just have quick two things to add. One is that biological opinion from the Fish and Wildlife Service was dated from 2001. So that would have included the newer science, as well our environmental assessment for the Ackerson Meadow project in particular. The Forest Service evaluated the herbicides proposed for use, ran them through their whole risk assessment process. So that also includes newer information.
So it was 2000 to 2001. That's like 20 years ago. And
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant 2020.
okay.
21. Sorry, all those zeros and twos got confounded. And did I say Ackerson EA? Yeah.
So my next question is for council. So WCB is not the lead agency, we're the responsible agency. What does that mean?
So under CEQA, the lead agency is the agency that makes the environmental document that considers the environmental impacts of it. And then the responsible agency is the next state, local agency under CEQA that acts and has a discretionary approval.
And essentially accepts the responsible agency's assessment.
To an extent, yeah. I mean, there's a presumption that the lead agency's document complies with law, yes. And the responsible agency's role is limited in that respect under CEQA. So, you know, in this instance, we review those documents. So there was a federal NEPA EA on this project. There was then a state water board mitigated negative declaration that worked off of the federal document and did a CEQA equivalency analysis. In that instance, is the lead agency under CEQA. And then our action here would be as responsible agency. So we've reviewed those documents. We've made findings documenting WCB's compliance with CEQA as a responsible agency if this board votes to approve that project.
So even though we may know that there are potentially negative consequences that are unmitigated, potentially negative consequences for amphibians, pollinators, et cetera, from the use of a particular herbicide, in this case, glyphosate, and it's not mitigated or even addressed in the lead agency's document, and we're accepting the lead agency's document, does that in any way make us?
So it was a mitigated
Exposed.
negative declaration, which under CEQA states that all of the substantial environmental impacts have been mitigated to below a level of significance under CEQA. Our role is that we start out with the foundation that MND legally complies with law. There's nothing that has been presented to us to make us question that. And then moreover, under CEQA, as a responsible agency, our actions are limited in what we can do with respect to an existing lead agency document.
Council, if I
Okay.
might,
I
Are
get
you-
it. That's okay, Chuck. I've got what I need.
Colin, are you aware of any litigation about the underlying federal or state approvals in this proceeding?
No, none.
And has the statute of limitations run for comment and challenge to those documents?
It has, yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, is there any other board member here? Questions? Sally? Okay, Senator Pavley?
Yes, thank you. Interesting discussion. I just had a few for purpose of clarification. I'm generally very supportive of the project. Does the lead agency or the responsible agency do the ongoing monitoring of the restoration and its effectiveness and how it's possible?
We didn't hear that very well. Can you restate your question again, Fran?
Yes. Does the lead agency or the responsible agency, who is in charge of the ongoing monitoring of this site?
I think it would be the grantee.
Yeah, the project proponent would be the one that's responsible for the monitoring of the site.
And so that's the federal agencies that are involved, correct?
No, in this particular case, this would be the American Rivers.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, because I know it is on U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service land, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to get a clarification of that. So this is just out of curiosity, since it's on federal land and sometimes policies change and presidents change, how does this work in with our 30-30 plan, or does it? Do we use our 30-30 plan to count toward projects like this?
Yeah, Senator, this is Chuck. I think this project fits squarely within the administration, state administration's 30 by 30 plan, which on the federal front is called America the Beautiful. And the
Right.
reason is it seeks to increase biodiversity in one of the most important habitat linkages across the entire Sierra Nevada and fix a past impact, which was by estimate 3 miles long, 15 feet deep, and 100 feet wide. Restoring that meadow is a antidote to that impact of biodiversity. I'd also say, while I'm not sure it would be the case for this project, there is mounting science that indicates when we return these meadows to their natural functioning ability, they are fire resiliency strategy as well. I mean, the places we're seeing these catastrophic wildfires slow down is where we've restored meadows.
Yes, thank you for that. No, I'm enthusiastic supporter of what they're trying to accomplish here, and it'll be, I had no idea it was one of the biggest meadow restoration projects ever undertaken. And there's multiple benefits, as you pointed out, not only the biodiversity one and wildfire resiliency, but as a former chair of the Water Committee, very interested in the hydrologic benefits and potential helping out the groundwater basins that have been overdrafted in the area. So multiple benefits. So is the state involved, or is that offsite involved in the water supply part of it? And that'll be my last question. And I'm supporting the project, appreciate the questions, ongoing assessments or reviews of any kind of use of herbicides. But I think this project is timely and it needs to go forward. But maybe someone could address how we work either with the state water board or whomever on managing or assessing or monitoring success in how we replenish our groundwater basins, because I think meadow restoration and WCB's role in solving some of these problems with the drought and water supply are a wonderful multiple benefit.
Yeah, I concur, Senator. And I, like you, am aware there's a federal, state, local, and nonprofit kind of coalition that is the Sierra Meadow Restoration kind of partnership, including in a funding relationship between our board and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And as you point out, the reason is restored meadows at high elevations slow down the runoff, allow it to seep into groundwater and recharge, which might be responsive to our increasing loss of snowpack as a superior supply strategy in the long run.
Yeah, it's one of the mitigation factors that I think is really key. And I mentioned it to Secretary Crowfoot the other day that working with the WCB on the ongoing water challenges is really an amazing opportunity.
Matt, if I could ask you 2 questions, and then we'll see if Catherine has more. Sally here, and then Damon, you'd be the last board member to just check and see if we have questions. I want to confirm, you submitted a revised herbicide checklist?
Yes, the questionnaire. Yeah.
And in your opinion, is that a description of the thought process for the project to kind of start with options, go through analysis, your own planning, and arrive at kind of the least worst impactful but necessary tool at the end of the day?
I suppose you could lay it out like that. I would say that it's mostly focused on efficacy.
Okay.
So, you know, we are focused on getting the most effective treatment to limit these species in the short term. Yeah.
In the context of the project, and I think you mentioned, I just want to confirm, the project coalition declined to use imazapyr because the duration and risk was greater than choosing a less impactful option, glyphosate. Was that correct?
Yes.
Great.
Chuck, actually, I think he was referring only to plants Imazapyr has a long life and it will affect more plants. We didn't get into the other wildlife on Imazapyr because there is research showing that for certain amphibians, Imazapyr is less toxic than glyphosate.
Yeah, I'm not a toxicologist. I'm sorry, I can't respond to that.
So Sally or Damon, any questions?
What is the duration of this restoration project?
The project, do you mean like the implementation phase or like anything?
The whole thing.
Okay, so the project's been in planning since 2018. I'll give you that context, and we anticipate going to construction in 2 phases. This grant is for phase 1. It'll approach just the downstream half of the meadow. The upstream half, we're currently have a significant grant application into America the Beautiful to fund that second phase. So it'll be approached in 2 years. First will start in August 15th, 2023, and it'll finish up by November 1st, 2023. Then we'll follow up with revegetation in early 2024. Second phase earthwork will start in fall of 2024, and then followed by revegetation in 2025. So roughly a 2-year construction period, followed by a 3 to 5 year kind of adaptive maintenance frame, time frame.
Damon, did you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you all for coming to present again. Really appreciate it. Sounds like a terrific project and support. I have one question, just because we have another item on the agenda later where we're going to be talking about, the board's process going forward in terms of looking at herbicide use. And just because, we have your questionnaire in front of us, 16 pages long. Thank you very much for the additional information which we had asked for. Appreciate you updating it. Does your team have any thoughts on the questionnaire? Just really briefly, are we asking the right questions? Are there any changes that you would recommend or suggest for the form? Thank you.
Damon, I appreciate your question, but we're going to get into that in detail in item number 4 when we go through the more broad discussion around herbicide. And one of the specific questions that we've asked, we will be asking not only to our board, but also to our partners, is whether or not there are any changes that we should make to the herbicide questionnaire that may help advance this issue and forward. So if you don't mind, we can hold off answering that question until we get to that item, or we can answer it now, but I'll leave that up to you.
That's fine.
Okay. All right.
While board members kind of contemplate, let me see if, is there anyone in the room that's filled out a comment card that would like to speak?
We did have some comment cards, speaker cards for this. Curtis Kavame, soil scientist for the Stanislaus National Forest.
Curtis, you should be allowed to talk now.
And remember, I want to folks to remember that 2 minutes, you have a time limit on public comment for 2 minutes. So please adhere to that if you can.
Hi there. Thank you. Just an audio check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name's Curtis Kavame, or Kwame, I sometimes go by. I'm a soil scientist with the Stanislaus National Forest. I've been on the forest since 2010. My involvement with the Ackerson Meadow restoration has been as a reviewer and sort of a specialist input since 2018 when the project kicked off. But I took over as a member of the steering and design teams just a few months ago when my supervisor, our forest hydrologist, took another job. So I've been involved with this project since the beginning, but have recently taken a larger role. So just wanted to express the Stanislaus National Forest full support for the project. Ackerson Meadow has been sort of a focal point and a very important piece of our Stanislaus National Forest landscape for a long time, and our hydrologists dating back to the 70s have had interest in restoring and doing work in this meadow, but it took a partnership like this with American Rivers as a lead and the land exchange with Yosemite National Park, it really was impossible to do this scale of restoration work until this partnership developed. So the Stanislaus is in full support. Our forest supervisor supports it. The district ranger, Jim Janae, on the Groveland Ranger District is a supporter of the project. I think I'll leave it there, and just wanted to thank the board for the opportunity to speak, and yeah, look forward to working with you if it is approved. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Curtis. Our next speaker is Don Coltrap. Dawn Celeste, is she on?
Dawn is not online.
Okay. That's all the speaker cards. Any other public comment? Any hands raised, Celeste?
There are no raised hand. Oh, there's one raised hand. 1 second. Evan Wolf, you should be allowed to speak now.
Hi, yes, thanks. I submitted a speaker card, but maybe it didn't get in the mix. My name is Dr. Evan Wolf. I'm a wetland ecologist, and I've been working with the design team partnership since 2018 or a little earlier, for about the past 5 years. And my role has been to help assess and design the restoration for this project. I've been working in Sierra Meadows for the last 15 years, assessing and designing various restoration projects for national forests, national parks. And this is by far the largest and most valuable and most impacted site that I've ever worked on. And so I think all of the descriptions that Matt has presented to you are highly accurate, that this is an incredibly valuable place that deserves a lot of our attention and focus. And this restoration sets up the park and the forest to have a long-term functional ecosystem that is sustained by natural processes over the long term. And it achieves all the goals of restoring wetland ecosystems to support both wetland plants and all of the various wildlife species that depend on wetlands as these oases of resources within our otherwise fairly dry Sierra forests. So thank you very much for your time and consideration of this grant, and look forward to working on this more in the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions from board members? Kind of looking here.
I'm sorry, we have 2 more raised hands.
Okay.
Byron Krempel, you should be allowed to speak now.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to speak in 2 capacities, both as a concerned citizen and as the Headwaters Program Director for the Tuolumne River Trust. First off, I live just a few miles from Ackerson Meadow. Every time I drive by, I see these huge head cuts in the meadow, and I am so excited about this restoration project. And then both as the Headwaters Program Director for the Tuolumne River Trust, this meadow, this ecosystem is within the Tuolumne River watershed. And the only reason that American Rivers is the lead partner on this project is because they beat us to the punch. We recognize the importance of this meadow, this ecosystem, and this restoration project, and we're incredibly supportive of this work between American Rivers, Yosemite National Park, and the Stanislaus National Forest.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
And
There's
we'll call
one
the
more.
last.
USFS State and Private Forestry, you should be allowed to talk now.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Stacy Clark. I am the Regional Invasive Plants Program Manager and Pesticide Use Coordinator for the U.S. Forest Service here in Region 5. I just wanted to reiterate our support for our own Stanislaus National Forest, as well as our partnership with the national parks on this project. And I also wanted to add a few comments about the use of pesticides, and particularly glyphosate, in this project that were mentioned. I wanted to point out that in 2018, the EPA did do an extensive review and updated assessment of the risk associated with glyphosate. And all of that new literature was used in our risk assessments for this project. Also, the data for extensive half-life of glyphosate that goes beyond usually 100 days into the several hundreds and thousands is usually for soil anaerobic degradation of glyphosate. It's not for all environmental fates and circumstances. And I also wanted to mention that a lot of the toxicity to amphibians and other organisms associated with glyphosate could be due to adjuvants used in different formulations, not necessarily the active ingredient itself, which oftentimes in research is not differentiated. And that's why we use aquatic formulations that are labeled for aquatic use. And I'm going to limit it to that because I also have a comment later for the general support in item number 4. And thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chuck, may I just point out that the courts have just told US EPA that their evaluation of glyphosate was inadequate and has ordered it to reconsider research that they rejected in the past. Additionally, US EPA was told it has not met its requirement under the Endangered Species Act, and so it is supposed to accelerate and hurry up with its biological evaluation. And they're still working out the details, and that was in NRDC versus US EPA in June.
Thank you. Okay, so don't see public comment, hands raised in the room. Think we've gone through the last hand raises on Zoom. And let me just pause and see board members on Zoom or any here in the room. Additional questions for staff or for project proponent?
So I'm looking at the table, and again, we appreciate you doing as much detail on this as you did this time around. And it does seem that glyphosate is mentioned as the potential alternative method available if the first method doesn't work. I take it that's what that means. And there is some indication that if it doesn't work, you'll go in and use glyphosate in the rationale for selected methods. So it sounds like the potential for using glyphosate goes beyond just using it for the velvet grass.
Again, I can't speak to what the park may do, 10 years down the line.
This is from table 1 on your.
Right. What I can say is that the way I formulated or formatted that table was that that just wanted to list the alternative methods that were considered. Those are not the selected methods for the species involved.
So they won't be the fallback method?
No, it's not the fallback method.
So note to self, that probably there is something in agenda item 4 when we refine the questionnaire. So we don't have answers that give misimpressions. Hey, so I don't know board pleasure. I'm willing to make a motion, but let me see if anyone else is reading body language. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the project as proposed by staff.
I'll second it. This is Fran Pavlik.
Good, thank you. John, you want to call the roll?
All right, y'all call a roll. Chuck Bonham,
Yes.
Sally Lukenbill,
Yes.
Damon Agami,
Yes.
Fran Pavley,
Yes.
Catherine Phillips.
I'm going to vote not voting on this one, and I'm going to tell you why. It's not a bad project. I think everybody wants to see this area restored. What I'm concerned about is the way there seems to be a disconnect between the existing science and the selection for using glyphosate. And I'm not persuaded that the park system is doing the kind of deep dive into their IPMP that they should be doing. I don't see any reason now, given what the science says, and also given what we know about its impacts on humans, not just wildlife, and given what we know about how it's manufactured and the results of that, I don't see any reason we should continue to use glyphosate on any of this wildlife, any of these wildlife areas. I think the evidence of how broad, how much it's being used, how there is an increasing use of it, an increasing amount of resistance to it. I mean, Johnson grass is one thing that, for instance, the reason I asked you about that is that it's showing increasing resistance. So you have to use it more and more, heavier and heavier. And that ultimately has impacts on the ecosystem, including the wildlife, the pollinators, the invertebrates, worms, nematodes, all down the line. So I won't be voting on this, but I urge the park system to go in and seriously do another extensive review of what that 2010 IPMP says, because if you recall then, there weren't a whole lot of public letters. There was a letter from a Sierra Club person who said, representing the Sierra Club, who said they could accept using herbicides if it was certain to not create problems. They used a lot of different terminology. Likewise, there was an indigenous group that said you shouldn't be using herbicides at all. So, there are reasons to want to update that and to consider the new science. And I would say within the last 5 to 7 years, there's just been an increasing volume of science, including in 2017, the state of California recognized glyphosate as a potential carcinogen. So I will abstain.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So looking at the votes, the motion passes. All right, we'll move on to item number 3 in the agenda. This is the Climate Smart Restoration Project at River Garden Farms. Kurt Malchow will give us a quick presentation on the project and overview. Kurt.
Thank you, John. Good morning, board members. This is to consider a grant to Audubon, California and partners to restore up to 19 acres of riparian habitat on River Garden Farms. Next slide, please. The project would plant native vegetation, hedgerows on 2 1.6-mile linear strips of land running northeast through the farm, along an irrigation canal and on both sides of a county road, shown highlighted in yellow in this slide. One end of the restoration site is within 0.6 miles of the Sacramento River Riparian Corridor. The other is within a 1/4 mile of Roosevelt Ranch, which contains over 2,500 acres of restored wetlands. Next slide, please. The slide shows an example of a past hedgerow restoration along a road in the same area. And expanding this type of restoration along a riparian area, the project seeks to address multiple conservation initiatives. Locally, it would implement a farm-specific restoration plan. I'll discuss that a little bit more in the next slide. Regionally, the project is located within the Central Valley Joint Ventures Sacramento Planning Region and would directly contribute 19 acres to one of their conservation goals of restoring over 8,000 acres of riparian habitat outlined in their 2020 implementation plan. Statewide, many of the 198 bird, 41 mammal, and 18 reptile amphibian species whose range overlaps with the site are identified as species of greatest conservation need in the State Wildlife Action Plan. And over time, the project would help realize the state's climate goals by increasing habitat mobility and sequestering an estimated 2,200 megatons of atmospheric carbon. Next slide, please. The project site is located within River Garden Farms, a 15,000-acre privately owned farm located about 25 miles northwest of Sacramento. Next slide, please. This slide shows existing conditions along the canal side of the project facing west. The dark line on the horizon is the Sacramento River corridor. Currently, the vegetation is sparse and covered with invasive plants. The project would install native plants on either side of the road seen on the right. Next slide, please. This view faces east along the other side of the road. On this side is a relatively new but sparsely planted hedgerow that was installed, but does not yet provide enough density for habitat continuity. Next slide, please. This is a closer view of the existing hedgerow planting between the road and the farm. This was planted by a recent CDFA-sponsored Healthy Soils Program project. And while this was a good start, the open spaces need to be filled in to improve habitat connectivity. This project would double the number of plants in this area to create the structural density needed to provide a continuous beltway between the two larger habitat areas on either side of the project. Next slide, please. Community participation is a key component. This is a field visit. This shows a field visit held for the local farming community where the benefits of hedgerow plantings were demonstrated by Yolo County RCD staff. Next slide, please. Youth education is another key component. The hedgerow plantings we saw earlier were placed by regional high school students participating in the Student and Landowner Education and Watershed Stewardship, or SLUES program, which is operated by the Center for Land-Based Learning. The SLUES program serves high school students residing in the Sacramento Valley region, often from low-income communities. The proposed project would continue to involve the SLUES program youth. Next slide, please. Once implemented, the project would serve the dual purpose of restoring a habitat type that has lost at least 95% of its historical geographic extent in the Central Valley while establishing habitat connectivity between two larger natural areas within the Pacific Flyway. So due to the benefits of threatened and endangered wildlife, water quality, and soil health while increasing net carbon storage, staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve the project as proposed and allocate $709,377 of Proposition 68 funds. And I would like to follow my general introduction with more project-specific discussion from the implementing organization. So for this component, I would like to introduce Samantha Arthur, Working Lands Program Director for Audubon, California. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Good morning. I'm Samantha Arthur, Working Lands Program Director for Audubon, California. And I want to start with what motivates Audubon and the work we do throughout the Central Valley. We seek to protect and restore bird populations and the habitats that birds and many other plants and animals depend upon. Unfortunately, bird populations have significantly declined as a result of habitat loss. And now climate change exacerbates this. Audubon's research shows that 389 bird species in the United States are at risk of extinction as a result of climate change. The time to act is now to address the biodiversity crisis, and habitat restoration is the most important way we can do that. Next slide. Today, we request your approval for funding for a climate-smart restoration project at River Garden Farms. The project will install a diverse suite of native shrubs and grasses on 19 acres of land in two 1.6 mile long strips on both sides of a county road, running through River Garden Farms. This will create riparian habitat connectivity between the Sacramento River and the existing area of protected wetlands on Roosevelt Ranch south of the project. This picture shows a past restoration project and the vegetation community we seek to create on River Garden Farms. Next slide. We've lost over 95% of riparian habitat in the Central Valley as the landscape was converted to primarily agricultural uses. The green on this map shows our historic riparian and floodplain habitat in the Sacramento Valley, where our project is located. Next slide. The green on this map is all that is left. There is a huge need to restore riparian habitat for the many birds and other wildlife that depend upon it. Next slide. Restoration of riparian habitat provides tremendous biodiversity benefits, and this slide features some of the birds we will provide habitat for in our restoration project. The Central Valley Joint Venture, a collaboration of 19 organizations and agencies, calls for an additional 8,000 plus acres of riparian restoration in the Central Valley to increase riparian bird populations. Our restoration project on River Garden Farms is a small 19-acre step forward in meeting this riparian bird habitat restoration goal. And I want to emphasize how much further we have to go and how much we need WCB as a leader and partner to scale up restoration across the state. Next slide. To meet climate resilience and biodiversity goals, our project implementation team will establish a diverse native vegetation community. We will control invasive plants that could otherwise outcompete the native plants and block our habitat restoration efforts. We'll conduct ecological monitoring of vegetation and bird response, and we'll complete 3 years of maintenance, including retreatment of invasive plants that survive initial control efforts and supplemental watering and replacement of native plantings as needed. Our restoration efforts are guided, implemented, and monitored by a team of experts at River Partners, Yolo County Resource Conservation District, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and River Garden Farms. Pictured here is the River Garden Farms site as it looks today. Next slide. Since the meeting in late August, our team revisited the WCB herbicide questionnaire, and we appreciated the opportunity to communicate our restoration and pest management approach in more detail. Our project will employ a science-based integrated pest management, or IPM approach, that includes manual, mechanical, and chemical treatment of invasive plants that threaten to outcompete the native species whose dominance we aim to restore at the site. Harmful invasive species at the site include milk thistle, Russian thistle, yellow star thistle, poison hemlock, mustard, and Johnson grass. Our IPM approach first uses mechanical and manual methods, including mowing, weed whacking, and disking in site preparation. Later, after we have planted native species at the site and set up irrigation systems to provide supplemental water for up to 3 years, we will judiciously and carefully use chemical herbicides if and when they are needed to effectively control invasive species, and when mechanical and manual methods present unacceptable threats to existing native vegetation and biodiversity. After the native planting in year 1, manual and mechanical treatment risk trampling or cutting native grasses and damaging the irrigation system needed to keep native vegetation alive. Steps will be taken to reduce the intensity of herbicide application, and the most targeted, effective, efficient products and techniques will be implemented. We will use glyphosate only for pinpoint applications to invasive plants, growing immediately around native plants, or to target Johnson grass, both situations where glyphosate is the only or most effective tool available. In all cases, we will use the glyphosate formulation approved for aquatic use. No applications of glyphosate or other herbicides will be made to aquatic habitats for this project, but because they are deemed safest, only glyphosate formulations approved for aquatic use will be used. A licensed pest control advisor with experience recommending safe herbicides to use in restoration projects has advised our integrated pest management approach. All herbicide applicators are trained and supervised by a state licensed qualified applicator. No WCB grant funds will be used to purchase herbicides. This integrated pest management approach is consistent with projects that have been approved by WCB over the past year, including a project unanimously approved in the recent meeting in August. We revised our herbicide form to clarify that the use of non-chemical removal methods alone would not allow us to reach the native riparian shrub and grass restoration goals of this project. Very limited and targeted use of herbicides with a backpack sprayer will be needed to effectively suppress the invasive plants, which will allow native riparian shrubs and grasses to establish, become dominant at the site, and then consistently outcompete the native species, eliminating or sharply reducing the need for any invasive plant treatment, including chemicals, at the site over time. I want to underscore that our IPM approach has been selected because it is what is needed to effectively meet our restoration and biodiversity goals. This project is one of 7 restoration sites identified in a comprehensive farm restoration plan developed by American Rivers and funded by the Delta Conservancy to advance conservation practices and habitat value at River Garden Farms. We completed CEQA and received a concurrence letter from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Our proposed project builds upon significant previous state investment in conservation planning and environmental review to implement restoration on the ground and provide the habitat where it has been lacking for almost a century. I also want to share a bit about our project timing. We applied to WCB a year and a half ago and have worked over the past year to collaborate with new landowners and establish our work plan. If we are approved today, we would need to immediately execute 4 subcontracts with our partners to allow their work to proceed, to set up the irrigation system next month and install native plants the following month. We are requesting approval of the River Garden Farms restoration project today, as proposed in our grant application and further detailed in our herbicide questionnaire. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Our full project team is here today or online to show their support and readiness to move forward with this project.
Thank you, Samantha. All right, any board member questions, comments?
I have a question, Samantha. So the glyphosate is being used on Johnson grass, is that right? In Pinpoint?
Correct.
And I'm looking at your questionnaire, and it will be after the restoration planting. So you won't be putting kids out there planting stuff right after you've sprayed glyphosate. They'll be planting, and then the glyphosate will be applied.
That's correct. And I want to underscore that the kids are only involved in the planting process, and that all safety and regulations are followed. And we're going above and beyond that in terms of the waiting reentry times, in terms of public notice.
And I assume you've seen some of the research on Johnson grass and its resistance to glyphosate.
You can continue. Yeah.
No, you have.
Well, okay. Well, what I can say about the, I think you mentioned it in the last comment about.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, I appreciate the conversation we had earlier this week.
Yeah.
And after that, I happened to stumble across something. I was already one of the papers that's in the longer group of selected papers. And it mentions multiple studies that have shown places where Johnson grass has shown to be increasingly resistant. I think that's probably in part because Johnson grass is a target a lot in agriculture, but is growing resistant to glyphosate.
And was this included in your list of research that you shared with us?
In the most recent list, which is in the board packet, but I actually have a hard copy of it. I'd be happy to give you.
Okay. Yeah, I did get a chance to review the materials that you shared with us ahead of the meeting and appreciated that opportunity. And I just want to underscore that the integrated pest management approach here, it is a science-based approach. So that the experts who are going through this process are first evaluating the site, right? So looking at the restoration goals, okay, what are the goals that we're trying to meet here? In this case, we're trying to establish native shrubs and native grasses on the site. Then we do a careful evaluation of the conditions on the site. So are there invasive plants? Are there pests that threaten those goals? And so that's what we've gone through in our IPM, developing our IPM approach. So we've looked at what the threats are to those goals. Johnson grass is one of those. And then we go through each of the potential strategies to address those threats, because what we need to do is give the native plants the opportunity to establish, to kind of dominate the site, and then they function as the weed control. And over time, we don't need to do that treatment. So what we're doing is just targeted kind of early treatment. And in this case, when we've evaluated each of our methods, we've evaluated that we need to use glyphosate in the targeted manner on Johnson grass. This is with a backpack sprayer directly over the plant to suppress that invasive species and give the natives a chance to grow and occupy the site. So we're going through a science-based approach that's relying upon, all of the current research and the expertise of individuals in implementing restoration projects. And so I guess I'll just underscore that is an approach that allows for evolution as well. And so that's an important, I think, system and practice to go through those steps and allow for new information to be integrated into that. I think our determination in this project is that we've come up with what's needed and what's essential to meet our restoration goals.
So again, the kids won't be out there after the glyphosate is sprayed. They'll be out there before the glyphosate is sprayed.
That's correct.
And just a comment too, habitat is a huge component in bird declines, but The international insect pollinator collapse is also a problem. And as some of this recent research shows, it is possible for birds who have been exposed to glyphosate to pass along characteristics of that to the embryos in their eggs. So there are probably a whole lot of things affecting bird populations, habitat, of course, being important. But I think this just underscores one more reason, the fact that birds exposed to glyphosate pass it along to the embryo. Another reason not to use glyphosate in this project.
I think in our kind of, estimation of what's needed to address the decline in bird populations, that loss of habitat is primary. And that's what, if you look at that map that I showed, the landscape change in the Central Valley has had huge impacts on our native species. And so we're really focused on addressing that need, and we need the tools in the toolbox to be able to have successful restoration projects. So I think that's really the goal of our project here today.
Yeah, I guess, it's kind of amusing because you've got an aging retired environmental staffer talking to you about an issue that I'm sure we both would come out agreeing in the end what the end goal is. It's just, I'm concerned that glyphosate has become our contemporary DDT, and we need to be far more careful about its application and more conservative in that. I would look to projects like this to find alternative ways to addressing the problem, for instance, in this case, removing Johnson grass, so that we can move away from glyphosate.
Let me jump in and just acknowledge that for several meetings, and we're going to talk about it here in the next agenda item, it's become obvious to me that people are coming to this space with legitimate interest in benefits and legitimate interest in kind of controlling risk and understanding impacts from our decisions. So I assume everybody comes to the conversation with good motivation, good values. Catherine, I appreciate you being very clear with your concern. I think that's important for the board. Samantha, thank you for taking the questions and giving us the view of the proponent. Catherine, if you have additional questions about the possible approval, I'm going to turn to Sally and then ask whether the senator and Damon have anything they want to ask or add from the Zoom platform. Then we've got to get through public comment and come back for possible motion.
I don't have any other questions at this time. Thank you.
Great. Senator or Damon, questions for staff or project proponent?
No questions. It's a great project.
I had a question just for purpose of clarification. The integrated pest management plan, whose agency is that the jurisdiction of?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a work plan carried out by our project implementation team. So we've got River Partners, the primary implementers in year one, Yolo County Resource Conservation District, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service providing technical and financial assistance. So that implementation team defines the integrated pest management approach, and we've detailed that in our herbicide questionnaire.
But is it a state policy or a state agency that created the integrated pest management plan?
No, it's a little different than the last project in that it's not a specific, there's not a, it's not a federal park. This is on private land. But we do have WCB as the lead agency here for our CEQA.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Keith, do you have any questions or comments? Sorry, Chad.
I don't know if this is for staff or for you, Samantha, but there was mention in the staff presentation that part of the property that's proposed in your project was previously granted funds from CDFA's Healthy Soils program. So it's a little bit concerning that we're going back over a previously funded project that seems to have been inadequate in its plantings and getting the density that was needed for habitat. So I don't know if you can speak to sort of the issues identified with that project and if there's a reason that that project may have not been as successful as it was intended to be.
Yeah, this project's really just going to expand upon an existing investment and an initial project. You know, I'll tell you, I was out there a week ago and there's birds fluttering around in the native shrubs that we've planted, and there's good growth of those native shrubs. And this is an opportunity to expand upon that and, like you said, create the density that I think is going to really make it a more functional corridor. And then also we're doing it on the other side of the road too, which wasn't a part of the scope previously. So it's really bolstering the ability of this project to function as a habitat corridor and kind of expanding and building upon that state investment for greater climate benefits. You know, the more kind of woody material and plants that we establish here, the more carbon sequestration we're getting, and for greater bird benefits as well.
Okay. Remember, if you are getting ready to make public comment, you're not required to make public comment.
So, yeah. So we do have some speaker cards. Julie Rentner, River Partners. And please be mindful of the 2-minute time frame or less if you're so inclined.
Thank you, board members. Julie Rentner, President of River Partners. I just wanted to thank you all for your careful consideration of this project and your engagement on this very important topic over the last year. I think we're making a lot of progress in describing the specific concerns, the specific experiences, and the specific lessons learned in restoration, and how to use the tools in the toolbox to get to effective and valuable wildlife recovery for California. So thank you for your support of this project.
Great, thank you, Julie. All right, next is Tanya Meyer, Yolo County RCD.
Thank you. I've been doing some editing on my notes to keep it short. So my name's Tanya Meyer. I'm a senior program manager at the Yolo County Resource Conservation District, and we of course support this project. Our organization has been working on farm edges in Yolo County and on local and regional conservation issues for nearly 30 years, creating habitat restoration on working landscapes. So that's a farm. Our restoration team has over 30 years of noxious weed experience to create biodiversity, kill weeds, kill invasive plants to plant native plants, because native wildlife needs native plants. Our RCD is the restoration lead for the project implemented with the high school students for this with the Center for Land-Based Learning SLEEVES program. We've been working with them for 20 years. And we'll be monitoring the site after the project installation to provide expert invasive plant management guidance to the farm manager. And we look forward to carrying out a successful restoration project. So we support this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Garrett Spain, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Garrett, you should be able to unmute yourself.
All right. Move on to Ali Dumas.
Ali, you should
Hi,
be able to
everyone.
unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am Ali Dumas, and I am the SLEEVES program manager at the Center for Land-Based Learning. I just like to provide public comment when it comes to the community education piece of this project. You know, like Tanya said, for over 20 years, the SLEEVES program has worked to engage high school students in habitat restoration. And we do that through a series of hands-on field days. Having worked with a variety of partners and projects over the years, we do strongly believe this project will really have a positive impact on our students and on the community. This project would be a unique opportunity to really expose students to careers and college opportunities in natural resource management and environmental science, while also working to support their learning of new skills such as the planting of native trees and shrubs, the building of irrigation systems, and the creation of wildlife structures like bird boxes, supporting Audubon California's mission. So through the SLUES program, students are also given the opportunity to think critically, developing new skills necessary to become capable advocates and develop a sense of environmental stewardship that also helps to build a sense of community. We have been working in close communication with the Sacramento School and are fully prepared with 3 restoration dates to ensure this project's success if it were to be approved. Collaborating closely with all partners involved, we are really excited about the opportunity to carry out this project and would really like to strongly recommend the board consider approving this project, as I really think it'll benefit the community and the students involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have no other speaker cards. Any other hands raised, Celeste?
There are none at this time.
Great.
Okay, I'm willing to make a motion, but just let me pause and see Damon, Senator.
I would be glad to make a motion if you would prefer.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, Fran Pavley make motion of approval for staff recommendation.
Right.
I'll second that.
Great. All right. So we'll take a roll call vote. So Chuck Bonham.
Yes.
Sally Lucanville.
Yes.
Damon Nagami.
Yes.
Fran Pavley.
Yes.
Catherine Phillips.
I'm going to vote no on this project. And the reason why is that there are so many organizations I really admire involved in this project, especially the Center for Land-Based Learning, Audubon, and I'm learning about River Partners. And I just feel like there's one plant you need to get rid of. You're going to use glyphosate for it. Of all the organizations that should be able to come up with an alternative approach and do innovation, it would be those groups. So for now, I'll vote no on this. And again, try to send the signal to WCB staff that I would prefer that the projects that they bring forward to us not include glyphosate.
Right, so we have 4 yeses, 1 no, motion passes. Sure.
So let's take up the next agenda item, which is in the packet described as scoping discussion for herbicide use in restoration projects. And let me start with trying to set this up and do that 2 ways. So if I put on my hat as whatever I'm called, chair or president, I feel like I have a responsibility to the entity itself and us as a functioning board. This is a entity within state conservation work, which for decades has been viewed as the doer, the place where people come in a, forget bipartisan way, in literally a nonpartisan way, to discuss and approve vast projects which have benefited California in so many ways. Just see our 75th anniversary. So now we have a legitimate issue, which I think has been rightly raised by one of our board members. So thank you, Catherine. And amongst ourselves as a board, we need to figure out how we're going to navigate the topic, because while it's not every agenda item, for about a year, it's been a couple of items in each board meeting that has some connection to the application of glyphosate within a broader restoration effort. We're a 7-member voting board with important non-voting advisory members. I think we are trying as a board to balance the space for each board member to bring its views and perspectives, but we've got to realize we need the board also to maintain its ability to approve projects, to take votes and kind of dispatch the business we're charged with as the conservation agent for California. So I think this is a conversation that has a relationship to those dynamics. If y'all see it differently, or you've got real-time critique for how I'm handling it as chair, or president, please don't hesitate. Now, on the flip side, as an individual, I do think for my own thought process, when I get a project presented, I'm trying to figure out the due diligence that's been done around it, the relationship to funding that's being requested, how it fits with objectives we hold as an entity and across our administration. And then in these projects, which are involved in the proposed use of glyphosate, I think we've improved how we're handling it over the last year. Catherine, in my view, that's in part because of your participation. We didn't have a checklist previously. We didn't have a conversation about the topic previously. We're now doing that. I feel like if we can continue to flex our checklist, signal to folks, we want you to put extreme thought into how you're integrating this into your proposals. And we're taking the time to really push on that due diligence. I'm not seeing a personal need for a lot more, but I think that's the point of this moment in our calendar, our agenda right now. So I just welcome any of us to have the conversation we want to have. Let's keep an eye on the clock around, maybe 15 or 20 minutes towards 11. We kind of move into what are some recommendations or tasks or next steps we might want to engage. And finally, I'm really cautious that we continue to have board meetings where the policy discussion we're having kind of drowns out the agenda we need to act on when we meet quarterly for about 3 or 4 hours, and we're trying to kind of advance a lot of projects across the state. So that's my 2 cents. I'll try to facilitate and step out of it for a little bit and weigh in as we go along. Catherine?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the progress we've made. I think the questionnaire has been really helpful. What's interesting about the questionnaire, though, is that I didn't anticipate that glyphosate was used as much as it is until we started getting the questionnaire. I think the sense had been previously that, if it was used at all, it was rare. And I think it's being used a lot more in a lot more instances, including instances where it may not be very effective given the way the plants have evolved. Personally, I think that the board itself needs more education on this. So I welcomed the idea of having a session where we discuss it and have some experts who are not applicators or restoration folks, but people who have studied the effects of glyphosate being able to give us some more information. I've included in this board packet with the abstracts a bunch of papers and references to other documents or citations rather, not the papers themselves. I think given where glyphosate is in the world of herbicides or pesticides, we shouldn't be spending state money on advancing the use of that product. And I think when Governor Newsom came in and his EPA was sending a very strong signal that the Newsom administration wants to move away from the use of pesticides and find alternative or less toxic ways of dealing with eradication. And I think most of the time they're talking about in agricultural settings, but I think as a board that is intent on protecting wildlife and wildlife habitat, it makes sense for us to lead the way, to be as conservative as possible, to protect what we are assigned to protect. So what I would like to see is getting to a point where staff simply doesn't bring us projects that have glyphosate, and work with the staff applicants, or work with the applicants to find ways to be more innovative, more creative, because we have had applicants that don't use any herbicides. I keep thinking about Soil-Borne Farms and what they were showing us at their site when we did the site visit. And we are not on the cutting edge of this. We are actually on the following edge. There are wine grape growers in or vintners in wine country in California now who are, if you saw the article in the Chronicle in the last couple of weeks, who are very concerned about glyphosate and what they need to do to make sure they can signal to consumers that they are glyphosate free. And I think there's been other news in the business section about Bayer and its concerns now about its acquisition of Monsanto. So I guess the bottom line is I would like to have, maybe as part of the so-called retreat we have talked about, have some presentations. I've identified at least one person who's very good at explaining science, has a long history in finding alternatives to pesticides, a scientist who knows pesticides, who could testify for us and get us to a place where we have a common understanding of where things stand with this and why, again, as I've said before, this has become sort of our new DDT, and we have to find a way to move away from using it, especially in wildland areas.
Hey, so just a couple of thoughts, and I hear you on the get as informed as we can. It's a fair point. I'm nervous about a venue which may strive to be educational, but could result in argument. I mean, I've been around like you a long time and witnessed a lot of dueling scientific panels. So if we go that path as a board, because the board decides to do it, I think it should be with extreme structure and caution, because I'd be not wanting us to put ourselves into a venue where it's just it's a debate, it's an argument and a debate, and it's really not elucidating anything for the board. Second, I actually agree with you in the theory of projects and applications that come to this board should commit to the due diligence for showing their implementation choices are the least impactful in the context of allowing the project to achieve the benefits it's trying to achieve, right? And that's why I'm interested in Damon's question earlier about whether the questionnaire can continue to iterate for the purposes of putting applicants through the paces of proving their due diligence about the least impactful in the context of achieving their benefits. But lastly, this is the part that really kicks me back into just thinking about it as the entity and the institution. I predict we maybe end up in a spot where we have differences of opinion between board members. And how do we manage ourselves such that that difference doesn't turn into a slowdown, if you will, for the board's overall business, result in, veto or kind of confusion when we need to keep also moving the board? So how do we count for, difference of opinion? Eventually, I think it gets back to a vote, but we need process that allows us to have agency and voice amongst ourselves as board members.
Well, I frankly I'm not concerned about what you've just raised, because I think this board functions very well. I think many of us have known each other in other areas and have a great deal of respect for each other and have disagreed in the past. And it isn't the end of the world. Disagreement is part of life, especially in a democratic process. So that isn't my concern. And I think bringing these two projects back was a function of having only 4 board members at the last meeting. So, that doesn't happen typically. I think the questionnaire could probably be more specific, but I think a lot of it has to do with what happens at the staff level when people are working with applicants. One of the things that I sense from applicants is they're reluctant to ask for too much money. If you're comparing what would it cost to remove something using an herbicide like glyphosate versus multiple years of more intense monitoring and mechanical removal. The mechanical and the multiple years creates jobs, but it also costs a lot more. So I think we need to, at some level, and it's at the staff level, tell people not to be, that the sentiment of at least one member of the board is to not use glyphosate, and they would be better positioned if they come in with a more costly proposal that would take that off and use more innovative ways of getting rid of weeds and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know John has a thought on that, but if you could hang on for a second, John, and just let's. Sally, Keith, I can't tell when people are poised to hit the green button on the microphone. Open it up, CJ.
I have some comments, John. Checking you. Yeah.
Perfect. Sally, Keith, no. Damon, Senator Pavley.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, stakeholders, folks who wrote in letters. Thank you. I read them all with the abstracts of the papers that Catherine, you submitted. And I agree with what's been said that raising this issue has made an impact and made the process much more rigorous. I think the form, the questionnaire has been a great idea. It's brought information in so the applicants can show their work and show us that they've looked at all the alternatives that are available. This additional input that's come in, I think, has helped me better understand context here. There were some really helpful comments pointing out the difference between using herbicides in the restoration context versus the application sort of at a larger scale industrial agriculture level, which I think matters. I think glyphosate is a huge problem. There's emerging science that is showing that it is a problem for humans, for wildlife, for habitat. And at the same time, we're in the middle of a biodiversity crisis that demands that we redouble our efforts here at WCB and at the state to pursue our 30 by 30 objectives and goals, and do everything we can to add and restore a habitat for our species here in California. I think a bright line prohibition on glyphosate in our projects would be easy to implement, certainly. But after reading all the comments from our stakeholders, from folks who've been working with WCB, it sounds like it would be detrimental to projects and to reaching our 30 by 30 goals. So I have concern about that. We heard a lot about the levels of environmental review that have been undertaken for these projects. And as a responsible agency, I think it behooves us to take a close look at those reviews and make sure, we understand them. But at the end of the day, I'm inclined to rely on the appropriate agencies doing that environmental review. And as the science advances and processes like the lawsuit that is forcing EPA to sort of review what it's looked at with glyphosate, those things will eventually lead to better science, and I think more rigorous environmental review processes, which will benefit everyone. I would welcome a workshop with that goes over emerging science, as Catherine has suggested. Maybe we do that with some of the other agencies in collaboration and have a well-rounded discussion. I'd welcome that. I also think, to your point, Chuck, I totally hear you about the potential of bogging down and not being able to do what we're charged to do as a board if we keep revisiting this question. But at the same time, we can't just let it slip either. And I'm a little concerned that, the projects that are coming to us, I'm assuming the staff is supporting the herbicide approach, integrated pest management approach. So we could just assume that everything's been looked at, but when do we have a discussion about sort of where the state of the art of the science is, things like that? Maybe an annual updated review on the state of the art, just to make sure we don't sort of lose this thread, could be important. And I'll stop talking here in a minute, but I just want to thank everyone again for the engagement. I think it's important to acknowledge that all of our stakeholders have shared goals. That's what I've learned from talking to folks since the last meeting, reviewing the correspondence that's come in. We're all trying to restore habitat and minimize herbicide use. I don't think anybody out there wants to use herbicides, including glyphosate. So if we can continue to collaborate and find the best way forward with good shared values, as the chair has said, I look forward to continuing to move this issue forward.
Thanks, Damon. Super thoughtful. Appreciate it. Senator Pavley.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to thank Catherine for bringing this to our attention several times this year, and it is a little difficult when you're trying to review applications in a timely manner after they've put several potentially years into getting to that point, to continue to have this discussion. But it's important. If there's emerging science that is not really understood on the importance, at least on this one herbicide, glyphosate, we need to pay attention to it. And so what's the best way to do that without unintentionally slowing down applications at a time period where we actually have some general fund dollars? And as a former legislator, I know how volatile that income stream can be during the ups and downs of our budgets. So I concur with both Chuck and Catherine and Damien, and let's figure out how to do this, but in a very thoughtful way. And my first question was, we can't be, our WCB isn't the only state agency or department that should be concerned about glyphosate. Is that correct? Who else? I wasn't quite sure why we ended up by default the only ones who are really focused on this. And that's why I'd like to thank Catherine for bringing it to our attention. I grew up at the time with DDT, and I remember vividly that finally science cracked through the barrier and look at the pelican population today. So maybe someone can answer that for me. Is WCB the only state agency that is concerned about an herbicide like glyphosate?
No, I don't think so. I think it's come up for us because of Board Member Phillips.
And she persists.
So I'm thinking it's a little broader. So because there could be other agencies that have a lot of the science-based expertise. And I don't know what the format is, or whether it's a thoughtful hearing sponsored by WCB, or if there's.
Fran, I know that I've read multiple places and I neglected to go and look and see which agency it was, but the state of California considers it a possible carcinogen, which goes beyond what US EPA says. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess that's probably from DTSC, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
I know, which is the challenge, but just thinking off the top of my head, this certainly sounds, if I was in the legislature still, and we have a lot of people on our advisory committee, if this is of interest to your member who's on, I assume, those committees like natural resources and water, or any of the other committees out there, they should have an informational hearing on this issue. And I don't mind thinking of incentives for applicants to make that switch. There is a question that says, essentially, on your questionnaire, if it's just about money to do a different approach, they should answer that question, because this is the time, especially now, we could accommodate something like that.
Yeah.
Or give.
I have a thought on that.
Bonus points to people that are doing the right thing. So I sort of was trying to figure out, first of all, get the public to pay attention to that's an issue, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And the sooner the later on that, because you'll see people modifying applications or what they do to look for alternatives, and wanting to know if any state or any country has implemented, due to this emerging science project. So I was just trying to get it broader, because I'm sensitive to WCB can't be the only agency involved, and how many hours and hours and hours do you want to spend on this topic, and what are the consequences of that time sink? But it's so important. I think the discussion needs to be had. So I would suggest looking at options, and I like Catherine's sort of suggested comment that we really focus, well, let's just focus on for a year this one herbicide.
Yeah. So I hear a couple of things, and Senator, I have a thought on the funding issue, but my words, and I'm not convinced the WCB, promulgates a policy, but I do think the WCB has a responsibility to, express better clarity here, because I think we're probably getting our applicant pool confused on like where we're headed, what we're struggling with.
Yeah.
So eventually we've got to communicate in a way that's sharp and precise for our applicant pool, but maybe there's a couple of things we could do. So I think it's fair to say the board may want to work with staff, so staff are empowered to let the broader applicant proponent pool know when they come. This is not a kind of a blank check dynamic. It's not, hey, we won't look at how you're proposing to use these aspects in your restoration. And you need to be aware, applicant, that our board has interest in this topic, and you need to realize you're going to need to engage with us at the staff level from the moment you kind of come to us to work through this topic in your project. So that'd be point one. Point two is, like Damon, I'm a little reluctant. I actually personally don't support a bright line, which is, no, we won't entertain any possibility. Third, I actually think we could ask our fundee community, grantee community. Maybe we could even do it in written comment. you want to offer us suggestions on ways in which we could improve the questionnaire. So that could get feedback on what we do with the questionnaire. I like the questionnaire tool. I don't think we're using it as much, or we still have iteration in that tool ahead.
You might even ask them to not just come back with the questionnaire, but what would it take for them to be able to take glyphosate off of their pallet?
So I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
And then as a possible fourth thing, and let me make an assumption that we will still have projects that even after questionnaire, good faith conversation with staff who won't issue a blank check, all things considered, it's a rational proposal to include the use of the tool. Right? So if that's still a prospect, then we need a plan for that. I'm willing for the board to think about a science session. You know, maybe it's in a more informal workshop atmosphere. I'm super nervous about dueling scientists and not getting anything out of that. I also think we shouldn't do that as a board in a microcosm. We need to potentially ask Rebecca and John to check with agency and other entities. Things we may do at this board could have consequences or connections to other funders. Lastly, I do think Catherine and Senator Pavley, one way the questionnaire could take an evolution is ask people, look, if you had additional resources, could you zero out, would you be, you know, do you have thoughts on zeroing out the use? I think that's informative, but I'll just say we don't have unlimited money. And, you know, I think that itself becomes a balancing question. We're increasing our expenditures to zero out the use of a restoration tool. Does that eventually reduce our overall ability to fund restoration itself? And we're shrinking the ability to like amplify the quantity of projects we're doing. I think that'd have to be part of this analysis.
Can I make one comment on that particular issue? And it's also related to the timing of the funding. Because when we get funds, they come with us under a specific time frame. And so there's timing that we have to allocate and spend the funds. And then the grantee has a certain amount of time after that time to spend the funds on the ground. So it comes with time constraints from that perspective as well.
Hey, it's Jeff. Do you need a new chair? Is this comfortable?
No.
So to try to restate that, we could try to figure out whether there's some instructions to staff, my words, kind of in the, here's our expectation when you're engaging with folks that are coming to you at the beginning at the staff level. Second, we could try to solicit, you know, constructive feedback on questionnaire aspects, improvement of it. And we could, you know, head down the path of something in an informal workshop science space, my view, so long as it's constructive, not, you know, combative. And we're doing it in the context of thinking about our sister agencies across the state.
I'm wondering if there's a way we can more intentionally signal that we will prefer or prioritize projects that don't use glyphosate. And, you know, sometimes we look at projects and we see some of them, the restoration projects, are extraordinarily expensive per acre compared to a purchase sort of project. Maybe it's, I mean, are we required to do restoration projects? Is there a pot of money that is specifically for restoration?
There's some that's restoration and acquisition. There's some pots of money that is only acquisition funding. And then there's also funding for restoration.
So that we have specific funds that are dedicated to restoration.
Right. The majority of our funds is a combination. It's not only acquisition and restoration, but it's also public access development as well. And can I make one more point, Catherine, just on what you just said? If there's a way that we can,
Signal prioritization.
that signal has gone out in a big way. And that signal has been going across the restoration community for the last year. And, our partners are coming to this with open eyes, and they are evaluating using IPM, the best project forward. And at the end of the day, their only available use is, at least is what they're signaling in the development of the checklist, is that some small application of herbicide is the only way to move this forward. Even if you throw a lot of additional money at a project, if you do that and you do it in a mechanical way, the impact of the habitat and the conservation values that you're trying to achieve are severely impacted and may not even be achievable.
And I just want to make sure we're making it very clear. We're not talking about all herbicides. I mean, I don't personally like any herbicides, but we're talking specifically about glyphosate. And there are substitutes for glyphosate.
Okay, so personally, I'm not willing to do a bright line, which is anything that involves glyphosate is disapproved by this board. Second, I'm reluctant and right now not willing to set up some point system, that penalizes if a project gets to us with glyphosate, which is a form of prioritization and selection. But I do believe we can improve the due diligence. And for me, I'm fixated on questionnaire, mostly because it resonates with me in this policy arena as a tool for comparative analysis that does better at avoiding blank check, sets expectations, puts a due diligence onus on the applicant, better transparency. And I think it forces us into, it's a measure of last resort after we've seen the thought process illustrates it's a last resort in the context of what's being proposed. Then we're going to have to decide as a board.
Well, then maybe going back to what you just said, and then what Fran was saying too, what we need to do is a few of us look carefully at the application. Maybe there needs to be some preamble language in it that makes it clear why we're asking some of the questions we're asking, but then have something more specific about if money wasn't an object, except put in a more sensible way. Would you be able to do a more innovative approach that doesn't use glyphosate?
So let me test with board members. And again, I can't tell you why, but I have an 1115 that is all about saving biodiversity in California. And I really want to make that 1115. But I don't want to cut it short. If I don't think we're voting here as much as, so I trust the remaining 4 board members and John to figure out if you want to keep going today. But what I'm hearing are, let me test Damon, Fran, of course, Keith and our other advisory members, Sally. Would this be a set of takeaways? Focusing in on some descriptive staff instruction, and let's say it's a 1-pager. That is a board communication to our staff about expectation when they're engaging with applicants who may end up using or proposing glyphosate. Second, we really embrace and try to improve the questionnaire, whatever that may be, to be determined. And we consider asking for people to give us advice on how the questionnaire can be improved. And then third, whether you decide today or not, we keep open the possibility. I've heard a few of us suggest interest in kind of a science discussion in an informal workshop space. That could be 3 takeaways out of today.
And Chuck, I
Go
would
ahead.
support that moving forward. I don't think we can draw a fine line if you can't apply for funding if you're using glyphosate. But the word's getting out. Catherine will make sure the word gets out. And we're going to see some responses. I think you've got a thoughtful way. So for the next year, focusing on glyphosate and really understanding what the emerging science is, but allowing the WCB to function like they should be and reviewing applications for acquisition and implementation of projects. We want all that to happen. So I would support your outline of some priorities that we should pursue for this next year.
Yeah, I would support that as well. I especially like the board guidance to staff. I think saying what we mean and what we want and conveying that to staff while staff is looking at applications, combined with getting more input on the questionnaire, handles it at the staff level, which is where I think this needs to happen. So I'm supportive.
And one way we might get away from doing a day of dueling scientists is doing something that I've seen other state boards do. And that is at the beginning of their meetings, they'll have a presentation about a specific science topic. We might want to devote the coming year to having a presentation at the beginning, a 20-minute presentation, come up with a list of 4 different scientists who can do that. And then that way we're just listening and then moving forward. And then by the end of the year, we should be better informed as a board. But I do hope all of this doesn't preclude us at some point having a half day where we can talk about WCB issues generally, because there are so many of us that need to be educated more about what y'all do and stuff.
Right.
Is a way to wrap up today that you could test whether John and Rebecca feel they've heard some suggestions on next steps and maybe ask them to kind of crystallize some suggestions around these couple of 3 things and come back to us. So.
Yeah, that's fine. And many of the comments that you guys have made that we've already talked about, particularly guidance to staff, additional implementation, or not implementation, but changes to the questionnaire to solicit different kinds of information that will be helpful for you all, as well as the public, to engage in this. And then I really like the idea of potentially doing a 20-minute presentation during a board meeting, as opposed to having dueling scientists come up and do that in some kind of public forum. I just don't think that would be very helpful to this board, and that's my own personal opinion.
You could, I think we meet 4 times a year, so you're basically, and dare I say, we all look at that over the trajectory of a year. It's fair and balanced. It's going to be thoughtful, cause us to think, and informative.
It was all good.
Yeah.
All right. But
so I don't know if I could repeat it, Jen.
No, but with Director Donnelly's confirmation on the 15-minute presentation, 5-minute Q&A, whatever you want at the beginning of the quarterly meetings, I think that's a good addition to that list that's manageable. I just want, I don't want to slow down all the good work WCB does.
John's going to just have to put 7:30 as our agenda start time.
That was going to be and we're going to look, because we're going to be developing our schedule for next year, which will be out in our November board meeting schedule. And I would like to ask all of the board members to schedule a day for WCB meetings for next year. For this last year, I felt that many of the projects were rushed through. A lot of the public members, I hate to cut public members off from talking and supporting these projects. And so I want to make sure that we have enough time to do that.
Okay.
That sounds good. John, do you anticipate there are going to be more projects because there's more funding, like more than we've been seeing on meeting agendas?
Yes. And, you know, I don't think this board can afford to debate this particular issue during each project. It's just, it's not a good way to,
right,
for time management.
That's my concern, whatever the issue is, but right, you know, just that takes up so much of everyone's limited time and trying to process by the end of the year all the applications that are ready to go. There's consequences. So I think you've got a great middle ground between Catherine and John and staff. Thank you, Director Bonham. I'm ready to say that's fine, and we'll see you in November.
Works for me. Damn it, I see head nods up here.
Yep.
Okay. Dare I say we adjourn?
No, we still have quite a bit of public comment on this particular issue.
Oh, right.
If folks would like to still engage us, I would appreciate that. So if the board members don't have any other comments or questions or recommendations, I'll start calling on public members. And remember, please hold your comments to 2 minutes, if at all possible. So first up is Matt Freitas. You don't have a comment? Okay. Kurt McCasland. McCasland, sorry. Thanks, Chuck. No. He's not on? Okay, we'll move on to Jen Norris.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to let you know how much I appreciate this conversation. My name is Jennifer Norris. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat at the California Natural Resources Agency. I lead the state's initiative to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030, and I oversee government-wide efforts to cut green tape to accelerate the pace and scale of habitat restoration. And I can tell you that just a couple days ago in this room, we had hundreds of people excited beyond words to get this work done and work with us on achieving these goals. Governor Newsom committed to California to 30 by 30 and cutting green tape through his nature-based solutions executive order, which recognized the importance of nature in the fight against climate change and necessity of protecting biodiversity as the building blocks of healthy natural systems. Nature-based solutions include sustainable pest management as part of a holistic approach to addressing these challenges. This year, California will invest $54 billion to fight climate change. Of this, the budget includes $1.5 billion to restore habitats, build wildlife corridors, and protect nature. This money will go quickly. The California Natural Resources Agency released our Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy. We identified a suite of actions and tools to ensure we reach our goal of conserving 6 million acres of land over the next 8 years. And I want to highlight that we identified that we cannot protect our way out of the biodiversity crisis. Habitat restoration of lost habitat is key. We also note that invasive species are a significant challenge to achieving the state's conservation goals. Invasive species are a direct driver of biodiversity loss across the globe. So the removal of invasive plants is a critical element of successful habitat restoration and protection. And unfortunately, many invasive plants are difficult to remove without the use of targeted chemical applications. I urge you to recognize that an integrated pest management toolbox that includes judicious use of herbicides is critically necessary to conserving California's biodiversity. Thank you for the opportunity to comment for the WCB's leadership in habitat restoration.
Thank you, Jen. Emily Zefferman.
Emily, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm the ecologist for the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County, and I am the program manager for our Salinas River Arundo Eradication Program. This program, which has been funded in large part by previous awards from WCB, is battling a 1,500-acre infestation of the non-native invasive plant Arundo donax in the Salinas River riparian corridor. This infestation has tremendous negative impacts on the natural hydrology and ecology of the system. When I took over management of our Arundo eradication program in 2016, I was concerned about the use of glyphosate in the program, as I had seen a lot of negative press about it around that time. I've been a lifelong environmentalist, and I have a BS in environmental studies and a PhD in ecology. Through my research into the primary literature on glyphosate, combined with results of monitoring studies and biological surveys on the effects of our program on plants and wildlife, I've come to believe that the benefits of using herbicide for our program greatly outweigh any negatives. Where we've removed Arundo through a combination of chemical and mechanical means, we are seeing native plants returning, increased use by wildlife, improvements in habitat quality for at-risk species like American badger, coast horn lizard, western pond turtle, and dozens of bird species. We have not seen evidence of harm to amphibians that are present in the project area. So when determining whether to fund projects that incorporate glyphosate use, I encourage the board to look not just at laboratory studies, but to look at empirical evidence of results of restoration projects that use glyphosate, which often show that the long-term benefits justify their judicious use in terms of restoring biodiversity. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you, Emily. John Randall?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. My name is John Randall, and I'm a lead scientist with the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. TNC has decades of experience managing land and water for conservation, and we've repeatedly faced challenges with non-native invasive species that were blocking restoration, damaging natural communities, and endangering populations of native species. The results of our work over these years have demonstrated that the judicious use of carefully targeted herbicides and other pesticides can be crucial to addressing some of these challenges and to protecting biodiversity. We therefore support the judicious use of herbicides and other pesticides according to label instructions to control harmful invasive species for nature conservation under select conditions and where they're identified as the best available method, whose use will maximize conservation benefits and minimize harm to nature and to human health. First, a clear conservation goal must be stated in terms of the target condition, the desired species, natural communities, ecological processes, or human benefits, like we've heard from the projects discussed this morning. Then it's critical to determine whether invasive species are likely to cause harm to prevent the realization of these goals. If not, then it's likely that no control is called for. And we run into that situation too, where it's really an aesthetic problem and not a biodiversity problem. But for invasive species that will cause harm, it's crucial to next consider the available methods to control them. TNC, as others have stated, supports the integrated pest management approach to selecting methods for managing invasive species. That is, herbicides or pesticides more generally are one tool in a larger toolbox of management options to use to achieve the conservation objectives. I want to also remind us that each method has its own benefits and drawbacks. For example, even hand pulling of invasive plants typically disturbs the soil and often leads to trampling of valued native plants immediately adjacent to the pulling site. Even the careful of us, and I can testify to this myself, can often end up trampling the very plants we're trying to protect, especially on difficult terrain. So as a result, factors such as the life cycle, the phenology of the invasive plant, the size and density of the infestation, efficacy and control of cost of control, proximity to non-target species, and the predicted conservation benefit are all needed as factors to be considered. So we, again, would fully support the availability of all tools in the toolkit. Thank you for the time.
Great, thank you. Wolfie Rogel.
Good morning. My name is Wolfie Rugel. I work as a conservation project manager at the Butte County Resource Conservation District. Prior to joining the RCD, I was a CCOF certified organic farmer. Like you, I've learned that ecological restoration applications of herbicide are far more rare, more selective, and more highly targeted than what is common in production agriculture and in landscaping. I've also learned how profound and long-lasting the positive results of even a single herbicide application can be in an invasive species management or forest management application. In California, herbicide use labels, which are the law, are developed by the Department of Pesticide Regulation, or DPR, with participation from the state water boards, CARB, CDFW, the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, and other agencies, as well as public comment. That is why DPR's program is certified as a functional equivalent to CEQA. So are the forest practice rules, which govern the forestry herbicide use we may carry out on private and state lands. Nevertheless, when we are state grantees, we resource conservation districts remain responsible for, and we do complete CEQA compliance for every herbicide application we perform. This double or even triple level of environmental review is adequate to protect resources and human health. Requiring an additional herbicide questionnaire on top of the existing environmental review process feels duplicative, but we are used to reformatting the same information various times to meet the needs of different funding agencies. It's part of what we do. My concern is that the questionnaire as written implies that non-herbicide activities, such as multiple reentries with chainsaws, mowers, or fire, are virtually without risk to human health or resources. They're not.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Matt Swagler.
Matt, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning. My name is Matt Swagler, and I work as an integrated pest management specialist with the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. Our Natural Resource Division manages 32 parks and over 1,100 acres in San Francisco. Our scope includes restoring habitat for the threatened species San Francisco garter snake and Mission blue butterfly. We're committed to the practice of integrated pest management and that is evaluating all the possible control techniques and monitoring these are effective. Are similar to what I heard the other project managers talk about with the Park Service, we have a limited toolkit, and our pesticides are reviewed by the Department of Environment, which considers environmental fate, impact on pollinators, amphibians, water quality, as well as the potential impact on the applicator. We go beyond state laws, beyond label requirements, and make a great effort to notify the public with posting signs and with our phone number. We're available to talk, and all this that we consider ourselves one of the safest programs, other states and other practices, and we regularly meet with other agencies to brainstorm as well as keep on top of the latest science and developments, research. And I agree that we do appreciate the discussion, as we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. But I would agree with the last speaker's assessment of the questionnaire that it's difficult to quantify how much time you would spend, in a certain context without the use of any herbicide. And it's also difficult to really compare just cultural practices, because we considered so many different factors. Is that time?
Finishing up, if you don't mind, sorry, but.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. I support the careful consideration and getting all the details on the table, but I do want to make the case that to control.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Doug Johnson.
Good morning. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Good morning, Doug.
I'm the executive director, of the California Invasive Plant Council. We're a nonprofit environmental organization that works with the state's restoration and stewardship community. This morning, we heard about 2 excellent projects, and you should be proud to have funded them. They address critical needs, restoring Sierra Meadows, restoring connectivity between Central Valley riparian areas. These projects are well designed. They bring together strong partnerships. They're the kind of projects, frankly, that WCB is here to fund, that are needed to support the state's wildlife action plan and our 30 by 30 goals. Restoration does sometimes involve using herbicides, including glyphosate, as part of an integrated approach to remove invasive plants. Restoration isn't simple or easy, and the state's restoration community, with a lot of experience, stands ready to share information about their work. This community is built on people, scientists and practitioners and organizations that are dedicated to protecting plants, fish, insects, pollinators, birds, and more. These are WCB's partners in conserving wildlife. WCB and the state's restoration community have worked together over many years to accomplish great things for California's environment. There's a lot more to do. In 2022, we talk about increasing the pace and scale of restoration, and we've been given a golden opportunity to do that. So we look forward to working together to see what we can accomplish in the coming years. Speaking for CalIPSI, we look forward to working with other environmental partners, including NRDC, with their concerns with EPA and the Fish and Wildlife Service as they complete their biological evaluation and biological opinion on glyphosate. We look forward to working with DPR, Cal EPA, CDFW, DWR in California to continue to look at this issue in whatever way needs to be done. For now, glyphosate remains a very useful tool in the toolbox, and we are interested in collecting all the latest science and determining the way forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug.
Doug, I missed what, you're with the California Integrated Pests.
Invasive Plant Council.
I was attending those meetings before there was staff at the Invasive Plant Council. I'm not asking a question, I'm just asking you to think about this for going forward. If you could think about if glyphosate was taken off the table, what could you or would you or the applicants be able to do? And I don't expect you to answer that now, but just to think about it, because this is, as you've heard, going to be a year-long conversation.
All right, next up is Christopher Campbell.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Campbell. I also work with Matt Swagler. I work for the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. I'm the acting manager of the Natural Resources Division. I'm going to cover some of the things that Matt may have already said, but I was having a hard time hearing him. Our Natural Resources Division oversees 1,100 acres and 32 natural areas. We have a science-based natural resources management plan that incorporates a science-based integrated pest management plan guiding our use of herbicides. We manage a diversity of native ecosystems, including coastal grasslands, oak woodlands, rocky outcrops, coastal scrub, riparian corridors, and lacustrine communities. Our mission includes restoring and protecting habitat for common and locally rare species and federally listed endangered species, including the mission blue butterfly and the San Francisco garter snake. Our organization is dedicated to protecting wildlife and habitat and improving biodiversity. Restoring habitat requires removing invasive plants, including Cape ivy, French broom, mustard, or heartgrass, oxalis, to name a few. And these invasive plants, as you know, can quickly alter the landscape and degrade the native vegetation needed for our wildlife. We use a variety of IPM approaches to remove invasive plants and enhance wildlife habitat. And our initial treatments of weed incorporates hand and mechanical removal. If required, we do rely on herbicides when we don't have alternatives to restore wildlife habitat. The San Francisco Department of the Environment rigorously reviews and approves our use of least toxic pesticides, including glyphosate. We're deliberate and thoughtful in our herbicide use. We apply adaptive management on all practices, recognizing in some situations, herbicides are the only tool and effective way to improve wildlife habitat. We're continually researching and seeking alternatives to herbicides while recognizing that herbicides have valuable role in our to play in our integrated approach. And the herbicide questionnaire can be informative, and what a previous speaker had mentioned, it will inform you on what pesticides are being used, but it does seem duplicative. But I also thank you very much for the opportunity to comment and certainly appreciate all the work that WCB does to support restoration in California. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up is Stacy Clark. All right, no Stacy. Celeste?
Stacy is not online.
Okay. All right, that's all of the speaker cards that we received. Does anybody else have their hands up?
Yes, we have quite a few hands.
All right, go ahead and call them.
And 2 in-person cards. Would you like me to use those first?
Yes, please.
The first is Heather Nichols.
So my name is Heather Nichols. I'm the Executive Director for the Yolo County Resource Conservation District. And one of my colleagues already talked earlier on one of the projects that was on the agenda for today. I'm giving a public comment on behalf of our district and other my RCD colleagues, but the benefit of being sort of one of the last public speakers is I kind of throwing out what I originally decided to write and wanted to add to a couple of things that maybe weren't as emphasized. I will, I have a very similar talk about how we find it important to have herbicide and glyphosate in our toolkit, but some of the things going forward over this next year that I would ask WCB, who's been one of our most collaborative and engaging granting partners over the years, which I really appreciate the discussion, is to really consider the year or 2 or 3 we need to use something like a targeted herbicide treatment, and then the life of the project in relation to the effect of the short-term targeted application. So some of our projects will last into the decades and hopefully centuries. And thinking a little bit, I think a little bit about chemotherapy, as a treatment when you're seeking cancer treatment, that kind of thing. It's a short-term thing for a long-term benefit. I think we all can agree to that. And then as you're reviewing, having scientific presentations coming to your board, really consider including the practitioner element and how we get things done. because the scaling up in the workforce is no joke right now. It isn't just about money and time. It's also about workforce, and then also just understanding why we use some of these things more fully. We give it a lot of thought. So thank you for your time. I will step away and.
Great. Thank you. John, Carlin?
Good morning, John Carlin with River Partners. I too had prepared comments. They were going to detail how we've spent the last 25 years trying everything we can and all different types of practices to eliminate herbicide use. And we haven't figured out a way to do that. We've figured out a way to reduce herbicide use, both in area and the number of applications, but we have yet to figure out a way to eliminate it. I'm going to take the rest of the time and just try and address some of the questions that have been brought up, some of the issues. Pesticide use in California is highly regulated. There's tons of different state agencies with oversight, reporting requirements. It's all the way down to the county. Every county that we operate in, we have to have a specific permit for that specific material. So there's lots of other state agencies addressing this issue. And I guess I would ask the board to consider just the perspective of the amount of energy and time we're looking at herbicide use versus the amount of herbicide the conservation community uses in California. I think back of the napkin, it's like 1/1000th% of the total glyphosate that's used in California is used for conservation purposes. So we can spend a lot of time trying to get rid of that, or what percentage of habitat restoration and conservation gets done by the Wildlife Conservation Board, which I think is a huge percent and a very important role of the board. Money, in my experience, money will not solve this problem. There's a lot of other issues involved in doing this. And so I would just really consider you to try and keep all these things in perspective as you deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, Celeste, anybody else?
The first would be Mark Landgraf.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, board members and staff. Mark Landgraf, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. We're a public agency dedicated to preserving habitat for wildlife and providing equitable public access in Santa Clara County. Our preserves see over 600,000 visitors a year. So in addition to our priorities for environmental stewardship, public safety is also of great importance to us. In fact, it's in great part because of our focus on safety for visitors and also for our staff and volunteers that we use glyphosate in very sparingly amounts. While our agency minimizes the use of glyphosate wherever possible, it's a tool that's necessary for us to have in our toolbox. For example, we apply glyphosate for discrete and targeted poison oak control around trails to protect visitors and staff from allergic reactions. We use it to keep weeds down around fence lines and buildings for fire risk reduction. We also use glyphosate for arundo and other invasive species that do not respond well to other methods. We recently completed our IPM plan and the associated final programmatic EIR, which has now been approved by our board of directors after extensive research into best practices, and which included review of numerous studies and decisions by regulatory agencies that consider glyphosate safe to use when used as directed. Our IPM plan was also informed by a comprehensive literature review performed by our sister agency, the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. So of course, we carefully follow label instructions and best management practices, which we research broadly on an ongoing basis to keep our methods up to date. And we increasingly use teams of volunteers to physically manage invasive species, further minimizes our use for glyphosate. But the key point is we need this in our toolbox. We really urge the board to allow appropriate use of glyphosate on projects it funds. And thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you, Mark.
Next would be Cody Cifuentes.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Cody Cifuentes Winter. I'm the supervisory vegetation ecologist for the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. Since its founding by voter initiative in 1972, Mid-Penn has successfully protected over 65,000 acres of open space in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties. These preserves are home to 90 rare native species living in diverse and sensitive habitats. I commend the WCB for bringing this item forward to discuss the use of pesticides in restoration work. I look forward to continuing our partnership with the WCB and other partners in bringing the best science to restoration work to minimize impacts and maximize the benefits to our precious ecological systems. Mid-Penn is a committed partner with agencies such as CDFW and CDPR in actively restoring, protecting wildlife habitats for federally enlisted and state listed species like the San Francisco garter snake and the California red-legged frog. Often restoring habitat requires removal of invasive plants. All treatments carry costs, and costs are not just monetary. Manual treatment increases human residence time, erosion, and impacts to cultural resources. Mechanical treatments contributes to climate change. Manual and mechanical treatments on or near cliffs is a significant safety issue. Most importantly, treatments that take longer expose wildlife over a longer period of time to degraded habitats. An integrated pest management program like Mid-Penn uses a variety of approaches to remove invasive plants under the guidance of experts such as botanists and wildlife biologists. For context, the Santa Cruz Mountains region contains nearly 3,600 plant species. Since 2015, Mid-Penn actively treats less than 100 of these species. Furthermore, approximately 20 require the judicial use of herbicides, or about 0.6% of all the species. Mid-Penn reviews all of our work and our IPM program on an annual public meeting, and we fund the University of California, Santa Cruz to comprehensively examine peer-reviewed research on all pesticides, and we make that available to the public on our website. I thank you for your time and effort in restoring California's wildlands.
Thank you.
Next is Krista Hoffman.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to comment on a couple items that haven't been well addressed yet in the comments, but have been touched on. Just an introduction of who I am. I'm the IPM coordinator with CDFW. I have a bachelor degree in ecology and a PhD in toxicology, both from UC Davis. My PhD research specifically focused on the non-target effects of pesticides and contaminants on non-target species, especially fish and aquatic invertebrates. And I am a former president of the Northern California chapter of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, and the current co-lead of California's interagency ecological programs contaminants work team. I'm just wrapping up a study, for example, that done in collaboration with Western Washington University, where we evaluated the relative risks of all contaminants in the Bay Delta ecosystem to salmonids, delta smelt, and their prey species. And I can tell you from those study results, glyphosate was not one of the contaminants of major concern. Contaminants that are of major concern to non-targets, especially in aquatic ecosystems, are especially insecticides. It was referenced that glyphosate might be the new DDT of our time. And I just want to point out that there are major differences between DDT and an organochlorine insecticide, which is a neurotoxin that targets voltage sensitive sodium ion channels, which do exist in humans, much like modern day pyrethroid insecticides. Glyphosate is a plant selective herbicide that targets EPSPS, which is part of the shikimic acid pathway that does not exist in humans. DDT's half-life is 2 to 15 years in the literature, whereas glyphosate is more like 3 days to 19 weeks. Pretty different, up to maybe longer in certain conditions, but that's the same with DDT. Pyrethroid's half-life is 12 to 16 months. So there are really big differences, and I think it's maybe inappropriate to compare, an herbicide like glyphosate to something like DDT, in my humble opinion. Other things that I think should be discussed are the differences in formulations of glyphosate. and this is something that has been discussed by some of the project proponents, glyphosate does come in terrestrial and aquatic formulations, and aquatic formulations do not contain a lot of the inert ingredients and surfactants that have been shown to be much more toxic than the glyphosate active ingredient itself. So the use of aquatic formulations substantially reduces the risk of glyphosate to non-target species when used with adjuvants that are safe. And that is a lot of the practices that we use at CDFW to substantially reduce the impacts. So used in a safe way with the safest formulations at the lowest rates, that are effective, it's a vastly different type of application than in agricultural settings. And that's demonstrated by water quality data that you can look at in public data online. You can see there are big differences between aquatic levels of glyphosate in agricultural water bodies relative to in restoration settings where that kind of chemistry is required. So I could speak further on it, but I just wanted to point out a few of these factors that should also be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. And there is a good chance we'll have you back. So be prepared.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Celeste.
Next would be Sharon Weaver.
Good morning, Sharon Weaver with the San Joaquin River Parkway and Conservation Trust. And I too just wanted to add two little bits of information based on some of the comments I've heard today. I come at this topic as both a restoration practitioner down in the San Joaquin Valley, and also now as the manager of a conventional farm growing wine grapes, citrus, and blueberries. And one of the topics that I heard, or the suggestions that I heard that caused me some concern, is the idea of looking for alternatives to glyphosate. And what I wanted to touch on related to that is that when you are looking for alternatives to glyphosate, if you are talking to anybody in the pest management industry or any company that's going to sell you a different type of herbicide, what will probably be recommended is something that is actually much more toxic, much more dangerous than glyphosate. That's been my experience, both in the ag space and also the restoration space. So I just want that to be sort of a thoughtful suggestion that, yes, there are lots of alternatives to glyphosate, but many of them have impacts that are more concerning than the impacts we're seeing so far from the studies on glyphosate itself. I also just want to mention that, again, the differences in how pesticides and herbicides are used in agriculture versus how they're used in restoration is very significant. And I appreciate the fact that you are taking those differences into consideration in your decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Next is Stacy.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Sorry. Yes, this is Stacy Clark. I am with the U.S. Forest Service Region 5. I really appreciate the last few comments in particular. I wanted to mention that we consider the physiology of invasive plants primarily, and oftentimes the use of pesticides is not going to be, or I'm sorry, even though the use of pesticides would be cost effective and logistically feasible, it's oftentimes also the only method that's going to be effective, as was previously discussed, versus other mechanical approaches, which will oftentimes exacerbate or increase the rate of growth of those plant species if you can't get down to like every single root. So it's very important that we consider the physiology of those plants when we're ranking the risk of those methods. I also want to mention that the Forest Service goes above and beyond what is done by the EPA in our human health and ecological risk assessments to make quantitative estimates of potential negative impacts to non-target organisms and the environment, to determine the environmental fate of the chemicals used, and also to determine any design features that will negate or minimize the risk to humans or the environment. This was required by several court cases in the early 80s in the Ninth Circuit Court that said, while we can still use EPA toxicology data now, since then, we are required to do our own independent assessments. rather than just relying alone on the data provided during FIFRA registration, which is what the EPA does. They only rely on that data that was provided during FIFRA. So we use current scientific literature and all kinds of other data in our risk assessments, which we provide in our work with our state and private foresters, state and private partners to identify strategies that are going to be effective while also minimizing those negative impacts to humans and the environment. We greatly appreciate and rely on this coordination with our partners who are doing great work beyond NFS lands to support restoration in California. We need to make every effort possible to ensure that our approaches across boundaries are collaborative, effective, and achieve desired outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Byron Krempel.
My name is Byron Krempel, and I'm the Headwaters Program Director for the Tuolumne River Trust. Our organization works to protect and restore the Tuolumne River watershed for the benefit of current and future generations. One of our biggest efforts right now is reforestation within the rimfire footprint, which burned 257,000 acres, 97% of which was in the Tuolumne River watershed. In this burn scar, over 90,000 acres saw complete overstory mortality, killing off all the trees that provide thermal cover, habitat, and migration corridors for native species. Part of the reforestation process is ensuring that planted trees aren't outcompeted. These release treatments can cost thousands of dollars per acre when occurring via hand treatments, but only hundreds of dollars per acre when we use herbicide. This is important as we try to reforest tens of thousands of acres of this burned landscape. The herbicide questionnaire asks many pertinent and good questions, many of which were addressed in the NEPA we work under to conduct large landscape restoration. Work in burn scars and under this particular NEPA is just one portion of what we do. There are many opportunities to use chemicals other than glyphosate and many opportunities to use non-herbicide manual treatments to remove invasive plants. We request that the WCB recognize that not all projects and applications were created equal and that existing NEPA documents cannot be easily changed to meet new and conflicting requirements. Because of this, we hope that the WCB recognizes the importance of judicious use of herbicides. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron.
Next is Andrea Williams.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Williams. I'm the Director of Biodiversity Initiatives at the California Native Plant Society. CNPS has a long history of science-based advocacy around the protection and promotion of California's unparalleled biodiversity. And we support invasive plant removal action guided by planning, monitoring, botanical knowledge. Since 2008, we've had policies in place covering both integrated pest management and appropriate use of herbicides. And we know that IPM involves understanding your target organisms, setting thresholds, selecting the appropriate control methods and seasonality based on effectiveness and impacts to the site, to the species present, and to people, and to monitoring and adjusting your work based on results. I want to point out, as others have, that no control method is without impact, and choosing the most effective and least impactful method for the desired resource outcome is central to restoration work. The WCB herbicide questionnaire does set up a false framework where impacts of herbicide use are the only potential harm. Alternatives such as mechanical control may impact non-target species, delay recovery of native species, impact below ground cultural resources, or increase the likelihood of invasion by other pest plants. Herbicide use and restoration is small scale, short term, and targeted specifically to restore habitat. It's significantly different from use in herbicide, from use in agricultural and landscaping, in the scale, in the methods, and in the intent of the work. Initial targeted applications of herbicide in a project area can result in a landscape that's dominated by native plants and significantly reduce herbicide in the area over time, as well as providing more immediately other ecological and community benefits. We urge you to recognize that an IPM toolbox that includes targeted use of herbicides is the right approach to protecting California's biodiversity, and look forward to conversations around rethinking the questionnaire to better capture the IPM process. Thanks for your work and consideration in this area.
Thank you.
Next is Charles Delgado.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Charles Delgado. I am the Policy Director for Sustainable Conservation. We're an organization that works closely with restoration practitioners and state agencies for the acceleration of restoration projects. We're also supporters of the Cutting Green Tape process being led by the CNRA. I'd just like to echo a lot of the commentary we've heard so far today. And just 2 points. The first being that I would respectfully request that the board continue to really involve the information and viewpoints supplied by the restoration community, as we've heard today. I believe that that expertise is essential to understanding this issue. And then my second point is that I would also respectfully request that any conversation or the results of the conversation that's going to be occurring over the coming year be coordinated closely with all of the other state agencies that have regulatory oversight in this area, and that these efforts be coordinated with the existing 30 by 30 strategy to continue accelerating restoration. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no additional raised hands.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for your public comment and engaging with us in this really important topic. So any board member questions or follow-up at this point? No, Fran or Damon, any closing comments? All right, hearing none.
No closing comments, but thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
All right. So just a couple things. We will be moving projects forward. I just want to kind of recap for me and my staff that we will continue to move projects forward. That there is an herbicide glyphosate component to those. We will ask all of those involved in today's discussion to take a look at our herbicide questionnaire and please provide us comments, enhancements or changes to that form to actually make it a better form, a more informative form, and a form that the board can use to really inform themselves on the herbicide use in a particular project. And get those to us as soon as possible if you have time, because we'd like to get it in practice and update the questionnaire as soon as possible. I would like to ask the board members to do the same. Think about it based on the questions, comments that we received today. What will help you make an informed decision on projects to move forward? And what I don't want really though is, folks spend an enormous amount of time doing pre-apps, full applications, and that's really important. And I know the questionnaire is important, but I think there's a way that we can simplify, but actually pull out the most important information in the questionnaire to make it a really easy document to fill out, a really understandable document, and a really informable document for the board members. So I don't want our land trust community, our partner community to think we're gonna, provide a form for you to fill out that is 300 pages. That's just not going to be the way we're going to operate. I don't think. Well, I'm not going to. It shouldn't be it's going to be your job to, be precise, be very direct, be inclusive. And you guys do your due diligence. We as staff do our due diligence. We know what goes into this stuff. We just need to articulate that on the form in a really concise and a very clear way. The other thing that we'll do at a staff level is work on a one-pager, like a FAQ document that we'll put up on our web to help us, help you all, help our board, just be more informative on the herbicide arena. And then we'll also think about bringing forward maybe not at our November meeting because we're running, we'll see what we can do, but maybe starting in February is to bring forward to have a presentation on this very issue. And I don't know what that will be yet. I'm thinking I don't know what that'll be yet, but we'll look to do that going forward as well.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Yes.
to talk about that.
And so I'd just like to say, if there's no other board member comments or questions, I do want to say thank you for everybody in attendance today. Thanks for your time and effort, your understanding in this. I do want to especially reach out to the project partners in today's projects for their understanding, carrying in them projects over to from the last meeting to this meeting. But, you know, I think the board approved and allocated funding to really two great projects today, and looking forward to seeing the implementation of those projects on the ground. And so with that, I think I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
That's fun. Yeah, I think that's the part I love. We had to do legislation, damn it. We fixed it. Yeah, because they came to us, I don't know, like 2 years ago. Well, we had to change our fishing game code because we have to change our fishing game code because our